Again. And as I said, it was Rastafari who set out that subject area. It sounds to me like he might be coming in soon. So I'll be looking out for that. That's the impression I was getting there a moment ago in the background. But King Cyprus Selassie, I would like to hear. I know you'd have much to say, but even within that, something that was said a moment ago. So King Anko Madrid was highlighted, interestingly, even for everyone, that most of those top-notch councils were held in Turkey. He gave a list of them. And I think, you could argue that a lot of the known Christendom theology, and I would believe the Bible to some degree, was formed and shaped during that time. Now, if I'm wrong, I want to correct me. So if that is so, because then we'd have to again look back at the Ethiopian stance. We understand that Ethiopia would have made its separation from a lot of these council fathers because of disagreement over theology as well. So I myself, as a scholar, I would like to even home in, if possible, on that period of time, all of these councils and conferences that are taking place in Turkey and other places. Where is Ethiopia's stance? And back to its manuscript, because I wouldn't even want to stray away from its personal manuscript to the Ethiopian manuscript. And when I made mention earlier, its origin, because it's unique. It doesn't look like anybody else's own. But its origin, it almost remains a mystery to us as far as
what I feel I had to say too is that from one understand and one studying and thing, it have a divergence from it have a divergence between the historical archaeological record of Ethiopia and the traditional legendary version of Ethiopia history now. You understand? Because Izana and these.
Which one is the legendary?
All right. The semi-legendary one is the narration where it's saying where Queen Sheba went to Solomon and certain vibes like that, right? And that within like textual, scriptural kind of vibes. But if you're talking about Izana and these people, they used to have different deities pre-conversion. So in a way, this way I want to ask Rastafari too, because I want to know when is the first origin of Judaism in Ethiopia because it seemed like if they get Christianity first and then have a Judaic element infused inside it, because they get Christianity, same thing from Frumentius. When Frumentius, he come up and thing, and then he went to Alexandria, where Alexandria was a main center of a Coptic Christianity, right, and the monophysite version. Because even from them time, they in the 300s and whatnot, that's what them same councils was trying to straighten out. And it has some churches pull on one side and they have this certain doctrine, and the other one have the other doctrine. So even as Rasta and even as Ethiopian Orthodox people and thing, there's enough of them to really understand that the Orthodox and the Catholic Church back in the day was the same church. You understand? It's just they have certain schism. So the Ethiopian Pull Square at the Council of Chalcedon in 451. That is when the Ethiopian and them, I believe it must be the 451. You understand? So when they get the reports from the Ecumenical Council about what take place and things, the Pulse Square, and they remain the Oriental. Today you call the Oriental Orthodox, right? The Oriental Orthodox is the same, the Coptic, the Ethiopian, I believe like the certain Syriac one, and India and certain place, something like that, you know? So,
But before you come in, Mas Adonis, if you could, and King Cyprus Selassie to throw up himself with a response and everything else. Everything that we said. I know you wanted to say a thing there. And then you come over to the response. So that's all you, yes. Yes, King.
Yes, Pharaoh. Give thanks. Wow. Yes.
Representing King Kwame coming in Rastafari. Not too sure.
You have a really busy time. You're having a really busy time.
This is show you here today.
Yeah.
He wrong, yeah. When you from wrong, yeah. I like when man fling stone and run.
Actually, it wasn't him on the phone as you were suggesting.
Oh, man,
really.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Pardon me for that, though.
No, that's cool, man.
Yes, King Cypher.
Yes, well, there's two places where I want to go. I just want to go quickly to Rasanko Madrid, where he spoke about the different councils being in Turkey, and what, you know, and I just want to say why they were in Turkey, because what had come when the Council of Chalcedon was around, where the Ethiopian Church and the Catholics or the Pope became, like you said, they were one. That's where they split up after 120 years, 120 something years. They split up. We're supposed to be 130 years, but it's 120 something. Anyway, the reason they split up is because the Roman Empire, being run by the Roman emperors, it was becoming to an end, and the Pope then claimed his primacy. So the Ethiopians would not accept the Pope as the head, because he was not, he was a priest. He wasn't but this priest of Christ, they didn't have him as infallible. They wouldn't accept that. That was where the schism came in. And then it was over the nature of Christ, whether he had 2 births or 3 births. Kuliklidet, Soslidet. In Ethiopia, Kuliklidet, Soslidet doctrine. I won't go into it at all, actually. But there are different doctrines in Ethiopia. I want the IDM to understand that. And this is from that period. But that was the period so that was where the Pope became, head. But it was in Constantinople, and it was in the Byzantine Empire. That turned into the Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine Empire is where Africa came around in the 2nd century, with the time of the Saint Anthony in the church. You know, his period, he's become a saint from Saint Anthony's time. So Africa, in North Africa, which was Tunisia and Algeria, I think it was Tunisia and Algeria, or Tunisia and Morocco. I'm not sure which, but that was that period, that place in that area was Africa. That's where the name Africa came in. That piece of land there, of the Byzantine Empire. Well, then the Byzantine Empire was where the Pope sat. So then they came up in the Byzantine Empire in the 8th century. They had a thing called iconoclasm, where they took all of the images out of the church. They weren't allowed to have any images, no icons or anything like that. It just bare walls with the same idea what the Muslims have. So this is where you'll find that people claim there is a link between Christianity and Muslim, is the same religion, but just had him coming out of Constantinople. This is, I'm not saying it, but there is certain people who would say that the Muslim religion and the Christian religion was one. And even then, going into Ethiopian history, It's even believed that some of the people who were supposed to be the Abuna in the church in Alexandria were actually undercover Muslims. You know, there's a book called the Ethiopians and the Jewish people in Israel. Can't remember, something like that. Anyway, in that book there, this brother is talking about ancient Ethiopia. He's quite a historian, and that's what he was saying. He put that information forward that some Muslim Abunas were undercover Muslims who were not promoting the Orthodox faith or the Orthodox churches. You know, not really expanding it. So it says in there. I'm not saying it is, but I'm just some reported history about it. So yes, that's the situation in that side when they receive Christianity and all of those things. I don't really want. It's too deep to go into really about when Ethiopia accepted Christianity. But I want to jump to Mesopotamia, the northern region, what we call Northeast Africa, because that up until 21 BC, 2100 BC. So we have to jump into the timelines. When we're talking about now, are we talking about Africa? We know that the name Africa, let's get this straight. We know the name Africa came around in that 2nd century there, in that period from the Byzantine Empire, right? We know that. So let's not worry about the word Africa. That's only the word. But let's talk about the continent and how the continent was an empire, a Kushite empire that extended over the earth. You know, this is where we have to come from, not looking, because the European interpretation of history is their given of everything. Is their given of everything. Is their interpretation of everything. So that means even when we're opposing what they're saying, we're still opposing what they're saying, agreeing with their timelines, etc. It happened, like they're saying. We're going to say, oh, yeah, it happened, but this is our version of it. But I want to look at where this thing come in, how it got into the Bible. And so let's go back into the 2nd century BC at the end of it, and the end of the 3rd dynasty of Ur in Mesopotamia. Them people there were called the Blackheads. They were African people. If you read their names, Lugul Banda, Ezana. You know, these are names of different kings in different dynasties in that empire. They're African names. Lugul Banda. Where's the Banda Empire? Uganda. Okay, all right. Who says it's that? You know, linguistically, who says it's that? Well, that's what them names sound like to me, as a person who understands a little bit of African linguistics. African sounds then, even sounds. Let me just say African sounds, not linguistics. I don't know African linguistics, but I know African sounds. And them names sound African to me. And then the name of the goddess, Inanna, the queen of heaven in Mesopotamia. That's how it's spelled Inanna, Inanna. And the Enki and the different names of the different deities that they have there. But Inanna is the queen of heaven. Like in the Igbo people, her name is Essi. Like in Ethiopia, her name is now Mariam. Then Sheba, the queen of heaven. And before that in Kemet, her name was Seshat. Different names for this same entity, the Queen of Heaven, Mother Earth, who gives birth to creation, you know. So all of these things are in Mesopotamia. They're African. So, but where can we find the name Inanna? Well, the I, even though they say Inanna, it's not really Inanna, you know. We're talking English, but if we were thinking in African phonetics, Inanna. Well, then if we go now to Nigeria, the name of the king of the rivers of Nigeria was called Nana, N-A-N-N-A, because they're married to the Queen of Heaven, as in the kingship system where you can read about in Mesopotamia. The king was married to the queen of heaven. He's married to Mother Earth. He's married to and she's got three aspects. She's a mother, she's a daughter, and she's a wife. Because we're dealing with a trinity in different aspects. So all of these things that we find in religion, the Christianity story, we can find a basis for it. You know, like the three women, when you see three women at the cross of Christ, Mary, the mother of Christ, Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the sister of Martha. Three of them. Why three? Because we're dealing with the same thing, you know, it's the same concept, it's with a different cultural expression. So it's in all of these ancient things. So from 2100 BC, which is the end of the third dynasty of Ur, who were the Blackheads, who used to go to Melhala, which is Egypt, and these places, they've got names in there which are translated as, oh, it's probably Egypt and Ethiopia. That's where they're going, because that's where they come from. Even their names are in there. Ezana, the same Ezana. You'll see Ezana in Ethiopia in the 4th century, end of the 3rd and 4th century. You will see Etana in the Ethiopian king list in the BC. Etana. It doesn't have the S in it. But we're seeing the same, the founding of a dynasty. We're seeing the same Etana. I know there's an S in it from the Ethiopian one. It's not, it's TS, Etana, ETS, or EZ, but it can be TS, Etana. So, and you've got Etana in Mesopotamia. So we're at the beginning of a change of a dynasty. So we're seeing the same correlation there with my man Esana in Ethiopia in the 4th century and Etana in the BC. I say the correlation is that they are the founders of something new. And so he allegedly is the founder of something new, Etana. But one thing I do say, I'll leave it there, but one thing I just want to say about Etana, when I've done a little bit of research on his son, if he was the one who accepted Roman Christianity as an underling, as if to say, now, you're above us, we're taking it from you, you're giving it to us. When you read the history of Esana, he expanded the Ethiopian Empire. He went down into Meroe. I think that's when they got the they got the epidemic crown from him. I think he went down there and conquered down there in the south. He went over into Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula. Right? Then there's a controversy whether it happened in the 3rd century or did it happen in the 5th century. There's a 200-year. But they've taken it was in their Catholic encyclopedia. They've taken it out of it now. You can't find it if you look for it. But I've read it in the encyclopedia of this Catholic thing, and they said there was a 200-year discrepancy whether Izana and Caleb was the same person, because Caleb went and invaded it supposedly in the 5th, 6th century. He went and invaded the Arabian Peninsula, what's it called? Across the Red Sea, Saba. What?
Is Yemen you want to say?
Yemen. Sorry, Yemen. Yemen. So these things, there's a controversy in the chronology. I can tell you, my brethren, it's something that I've actually. It's too much deep to talk about it here, but there's something going on there, man, because we're taking European interpretation of history, lock, stock and barrel. History and theology, we're taking it lock, stock and barrel. This is how it goes, and anything that doesn't fit into their pattern, they're saying, oh, that's myth. That's myth. You know, like Manetho. They say Manetho's talking 17,000 years prior to his time, 17,300 BC. They said, oh, Manetho, no, he's talking right up to around about 3,000, on and all the rest of it is mythological. As in, it's not, you know, it's not in the region of life. It's in the region of the gods. What is mythology? Nah, man, it's real. That's their interpretation of it. And they're giving us their interpretation of everything. So we're taking it as given and then arguing over their givens when we can challenge their givens because it don't add up. I'll leave it there, brethren and sister, and give thanks.
Yes, my Lord, give thanks, give thanks. I know I see King certainly want to ask a question there, but let me give Rasta Donuts the floor to answer the question that was put to him. And
give thanks, give thanks.
we give thanks.
You know, hearing many things, one thing I just want to point out to Sefer Selassie is that when you say Azana and we say Yazania, etymologically, there's a kind of an interesting, as I was listening and looking at the linguistics, you know, Azan, Izen, Ozen in like the Hebrew and the Ge'ez, it refers to the ear and the sense of hearing and the sense of weighing and testing. You know, like people have two ears, so therefore with the two ears you hear, but you can also weigh and test. So I just noticed that right there, that there's a connection linguistically with, you know, Azana and Ra Sefer Selassie's the connection that he pointed to in the name Yazania, Yazania, that the root in there is Azan. Azan, Ozen is ear, and also refers to hearing, but also the sense of weighing. As we weigh things with our ears, we hear so we can weigh with the two ears, you know? Just so that was an interesting connection as I was listening to his point. To Ankoma Jed's point concerning when Ethiopian or the connection of Judaism or the Yehudi and Hebrew or Judaic cultures in Ethiopia, as I was beginning to respond to that, you know, my thought and listening to what our brother Ra Sefer Selassie presented, I thought of the connection of the region. We talk about out of Africa. The first thing I was thinking is that it's like hip hop, in a sense. We say hip hop, for example, comes from Black people, but we see it in all different forms. We see Chinese people breaking and locking and popping and you know, all these different cultures kind of picking up on this, you know, but not really doing it the way we indigenously do it, but getting an inspiration and the effect of out of Africa, this biblical kind of culture, so to speak, coming out of Africa, but because of where Ethiopia and East Africa and Arabia sits and their own ancient history, reminded me of like the Caribbean and the East Coast. In the East Coast of America, there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of, because it's right there on the coast and people travel. Like even the Caribbean, there's a lot of influx of different kind of peoples kind of coming, enjoying this culture and taking pieces of this and going forward. But then we have the heartland of America. And in the heartland, they're not as affected by interaction of trade or tourism, because like when we look in the heartland of what we call Africa today, some cultures, as Brother Ross Isern said, you know, we can get that really African, undiluted, mixed with, because they're not on the coast. They're not in a region of the world where there's a lot of trade and communication and, you know, for example, there's the Red Sea, there's the Gulf of Aden. In the Bible, we talk about Eden. Etymologically, the Gulf of Aden or Aden is the same as Eden. So this kind of points to that if the Bible, we take the Bible in its presentation, there was always this connection between those who were on the coast, to say like East Africa, east of the River Nile, and Arabia. The movement, it was like almost like just jumping in a boat and going from this side of the land to that side of the land. So there's always this interaction that was moving about. Next thing I thought about was in not doctor, he doesn't use the term doctor, Archbishop Yitzhak's book, Ethiopian Tewahedo Church, an integrally African church. It's a hard book to get, but I would basically highly recommend we need to get that book in circulation. The one who His Majesty sent to the West to introduce the authentic African church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. He wrote a book, and in that book he goes through history, traditional and otherwise history of Ethiopia, going pretty far back to the Queen of Sheba and to the time of the Israelites, or at least according to legendary history of the Israelites and the Hebrews. And the thing that caught my attention was that just as when Islam rose up around 600 AD and began to make incursions into like East Africa and other areas of the continent, was the same way, no doubt, that this Jewish or Hebrew or Israelite thing also started to make incursions. In other words, the Islamic, I would say invasion at first, it was more cultural. You know, it became more political later on. But Islam coming from Arabia into Africa, or back and forth, the inspiration. Bilal was said to be one who called the gathering of the Muslims to worship. And he was said to come from Ethiopia, and there was this whole Ethiopian connection of Islam, because the regions are close. And maybe what we don't recognize in other parts of Africa, they don't have that interaction with this whole other culture. So when do we get Judaism or the Judaic influence in Ethiopia? What's the earliest times that we can say recordedly? Well, based on the Ethiopians' testimony themselves, this would have probably been very early on, roughly 1,000 years BC, 1,000 BC. But it wasn't like people imagine it. It was small. It was cultural. You know what I mean? Okay, look at the Ethiopian eunuch, the official. He is said to be a treasurer of Queen Kentike or Candace of Meroe or Meroe. He is traveling. He goes to travel to Jerusalem to worship. Pause. So this means that this particular Ethiopian, according to the Bible, he lived in the region of Meroe, which is like somewhat of a distance from Aksum. It's in Sudan. Today they'll say Sudan, and Ethiopia is the next border country. But, it's a very small travel. People can travel back and forth. You know what I mean? We get this idea that people just sat down and then move around. There's water, there's Red Sea there, there's Arabia there, there's oil, there's incense, there's all these products, there's gold on this side, there's incense on that side. So people did travel. So the earliest recordings that we kind of get that we can rely on kind of do go back to the times that the Ethiopians testify. I'm talking about from their written literature and other cultural, we have peoples that were identifiable to believe these things. That means if people were there, then this influence was there, but it was not like an influence like they came into Africa to say, we are going to run things. No, you get people living and meeting people, and like the Ethiopian eunuch. The Ethiopian eunuch, he went to Jerusalem to worship, and then he came back, and he must have bought a book. He bought a scroll. He bought the scroll or got the scroll of Isaiah. So he's coming back. He went to worship. He didn't go to do business, in a sense. He didn't go to do trade and commerce, to go to the Trade and Commerce Conference. He went there to worship. So this means that among Queen Kendeke in Sudan, if this story is to believe that's true, that means that there was religious freedom. that there was religious freedom, that Queen Kendeke or Candace, she had a treasurer who was a Jew or believed in the Hebrew, belief. He went to worship. When he went to worship, he returned and he's reading a book of Isaiah, the prophet. Now, this makes perfect sense with another document. I want to bring the document forward. It was written by Haile Haptu. It's a college professor or a student professor who wrote a thing about Ethiopian history. I have a PDF of it. I scanned the book, and we have the book out there. In this document, he is seeking to make the connections possible between Ethiopia's Judaic Hebraic tradition and Ge'ez and Ethiopic. And he presents a document that after the Babylonian captivity of Judaites, right, when they returned after 70 years, that Ezra and Nehemiah, they had the books of the prophets of the later books of the Bible that actually were spoken out in like Babylon and, where the Israelites and Jews were captive. But after they returned, they didn't have all the books of the Old Testament from the time of Solomon and before. They didn't have these scripts. And so they knew that there was Ethiopians or people in the region of East Africa who were either Ethiopians and were Jews, and they wrote to this king. I think his name was, I'll get his name, Arma, or something to that effect, but it's all written down in Ethiopian kind of writing. And basically what happened was that the Ethiopians who had the Old Testament up to the time of Solomon, they had heard of the prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel and the rest of them, because these prophets spoke out in Babylon. Many of them did speak, some spoke in the captivity, away from Jerusalem, away from the Levant, but they spoke out in Babylon. And so there was an exchange of books. Basically, the Ethiopians said that we can give you the books up to the time of Solomon, because of the Queen of Sheba and the son and all of that. But we don't have the books of Isaiah. We don't have the books of Ezekiel. We don't have the 12 minor prophets. We heard all about this, but we don't have anything. So what happened was that there was an exchange of books. The Ethiopians testified to this in one of their manuscripts, where the Ethiopians sent the scrolls they had up to Solomon's time. Basically, maybe the books of like Song of Songs, maybe up to like Proverbs, or up to the time of what they call it, what's the other book, Ecclesiastes. And the Israelites or the Jews, like Ezra and Nehemiah, it names Ezra and Nehemiah as the point people. They sent scrolls of the Old Testament, such as the prophets. But then they said this writer said this Ethiopian writer, Haile Haptu, he said that the proof of this is that when you go to the Judaic history, they say that it was during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah where they started to doubt certain pointing of the Hebrew. And if you look in some Hebrew manuscripts, there are kind of like, I won't say double vowels, but there are kind of points, if you can interpret it, there are points where alternative pointing of a word, like Ya Azania or Ye Azania. Ya, is it Ya Azania or Ye Azania? Little pointings like that. And the Ethiopian writer, scholar in this document says that this was only be true if the Ethiopian story was true. That obviously what he received was written in like Ethiopian script, and therefore there were some doubts as they were now rewriting certain Hebrew scrolls based on scrolls they had got from Ethiopians. I'll point that out right there because that document there points to some linguistic or literary tradition. The Ethiopians say that they communicated with Ezra and Nehemiah. And Ezra and Nehemiah wanted the books of Torah and the books of the Old Testament that they didn't have reliable copies of coming out of Babylon. And the Ethiopians said, we'll send you what we got, but we want to get the books of the prophets. So these are older traditional Ethiopian manuscripts that are outside of what Azana and what what they call it, 9 saints translated. These are older scripts. I've actually seen these scripts, and they are different than the traditional, what they call Septuagint into Ge'ez scripts of the 4th century. So there is we often think, for example, I heard the mention of the Septuagint. The interesting thing about the Septuagint, if you actually read the Septuagint, you'll find out that the strangest thing, the Septuagint is Greek, right? But if you read it written like somebody was translating from Hebrew into Greek, the word order of the Septuagint is Hebrew. So yes, it is an old Greek document, but strange thing, it's not written in the Greek sense as far as the structure, the syntax. It's actually written.
I see all kind of things I see on the internet, right? So it have a man, I see an interaction, a debate between a man who is an atheist and a man who is a Satanist. You understand? But here we know. The both of them are PhD, and one is a PhD in Greek and one is a PhD in Hebrew, right? And the man them, the one who is the Satanist is the Greek one, right? He come and say now how the original, due to his expertise in Greek and his linguistic analysis and whatnot, that he could say that how the Septuagint is a Greek document by this and that through linguistic whatnot. And the next one now, who's the atheist, who's the Hebrew specialist, he disagree vehemently and say no, it has certain thing and thing, Semitisms and thing what could only explain that is a Hebrew text. So was in it a debate about them thing going on in the world of the academia and whatnot.
Wow. I never checked that. I'd like to please send a link to that. I'd love to check that out. But I actually have some documents, actually even a document that goes into the same thing with certain Ethiopian documents. It's a research paper where they look at the some older Ethiopian manuscripts and notice the same thing, that this manuscript could not have been translated directly from a Greek, because certain word orders and word usage, it doesn't appear in the Greek. You know what I mean? So one thing this all kind of shows is that the linguistic tapestry wasn't as simple as, you know, like we're led to believe it today, that the linguistic, that Ethiopian obviously spoke Greek, like we speak English. I think we need to get this in our mind. We may say, oh, look, the Ethiopian translated from Greek. Well, what we're doing is speaking English, right? We understand the importance of English as a world kind of a language today. And it shows that those people in that region were highly cultured and were linked to regions beyond Africa. You know what I'm saying? In other words, some of our people were in Africa, like we go west, you know what I mean? And they didn't have much access, you know, like in Central and other parts of Africa to the east. Well, we had those who were, oh yes, in the east. So I just want to make the point that we had those who were in the east, like in East Africa, Ethiopia, Sudan, even ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was on the continent of Africa, but because of where they were situated, they were in communication with the Mediterranean. They were in communication with Asia Minor or Turkey, which was the land of the Hittites. And the Hittites biblically came from the Canaanites. And according to the Bible, those people, all that would have been part of African territory, according to the Bible. Because if Ham was the black man and Canaan is related to him, the Hittites were later on became those in Turkey. So all these regions were like more in contact with certain parts of Africa. So in our African traditions, very rich. We have parts of Africa that almost have very little communication with the outside world. So traditions many times can be, quote, purer, so to speak. But then we have other areas of the continent where the people were highly kind of like, you know, in communication with the outside world, India, Ethiopia and China, or Egypt and Sudan and other places. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that we have to look at the geography a little bit differently and notice that in Africa we have, like, you know, we're blessed. We have parts of Africa where our cultures stay the same because there's little communication, like the heartland, like we say in America, the heartland. The heartland's like Texas and the Midland states. Which one communicates more with the outside world? California? You know what I mean? California or Texas or New York or Texas. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that we have to look at geography, how geography plays a role in parts of Africa having other flavors. You know what I mean? Because it's close to other things going on. You know what I mean? So it shouldn't surprise us that Azana and others spoke Greek or controlled the sea lanes. You know, because they were trading with India. This is their part of the world. This is their lane. So yes, I yield right there. But
Rastafari. Good times. Rasai, sir. And they wanted to give a word there. I have a few things I wanted to ask now, but let me just make it as good. Don't worry. You speak.
You're muted, Ison. You're muted, Aya.
Rastafari, give thanks. Yeah, it was from a while back, you know, since...
Yeah, but still
Ras Cypher. Then imagine, the man can imagine I and I in a Rastafari at some future time having ecumenical council meeting and disputing whether His Majesty have a human nature or not.
Nah, not I. It's redundant.
Yeah, could we imagine? Well, I don't think so, because we all know that His Majesty the Almighty. I don't think that is disputable amongst I and I, you know, because, you know, where the Christian religion came in with this different thing, you know, it was because they wanted to take away the African root out of it, you know. That's personally what I believe. They wanted to take the African root and wanted to make this separated God, because in the African tradition, you know, they see the divinity in the king is a fact. You know, the king is divine. So
you see, I was pointing to something.
Sorry, go on.
I was pointing to something here. It's a kind of irony, right? Because okay, let's go with what's acceptable, traditionally acceptable. That there was a historical Jesus, right?
Mm.
Isn't it ironic that they will be having ecumenical council meeting to decide whether you have a human nature or not? If there was one.
Well, not if there was one, because it's just, I think that's the theft of the African tradition, and the suppression of the African tradition. That what I was saying about the kings, then, you know. So I think that where they're separating is Christ in heaven, and there ain't no link between man, because in the Ethiopian thing, you know, in the Ethiopian, not only in the north of Ethiopia, or what is Ethiopia now, but down into the southern regions, especially the divinity of the kings was and is a tradition coming out of those lands. And
the reason sorry,
am I losing it?
You want to continue?
No. Go on.
I want to interject there, Rasai soon, because I don't think the human nature of Christ was what was under debate. You know, it was whether like it have two persons in one, or whether is one person in a hypostatic union and different. You know what I mean? It's not the human part that what was under debate as far as.
Can I just say this? But the part that actually...
Go ahead. Sorry.
sorry, yeah. I'll just say quick, just to clarify in the Tewahedo, the part where the human becomes divine is in the baptism. You know, so they have the three natures, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. In the baptism, the manifest kiddush is the divinity given to man, which is in the king, You know, so we can see the king as divine. Yes, Bridget.
No. Just to say this is a very good question, because those councils and ecumenical questions and debates, they come in, what, about 200, maybe 300 years after the so-called historical testimony. And it reminds me of like the academics. It's almost like the people accepted whatever they accepted of the historical Jesus. You know what I mean? But coming to like 200, 300 years, there was all these councils where they wanted to debate and set. It's like another people coming in and questioning what they received, and or wanting to remake even that, what we're talking about, the African, the original thing. That amongst us is not that reason to the human nature, whether Haile Selassie had a human nature or he had divine nature. That's not a question amongst us, as it wasn't a question in the so-called biblical, so-called narrative of the early Christianity. But this question speaks to another group of people kind of debating this idea. It reminds me of the academics in a sense. It's almost like the academics now questioning what maybe people believe for thousands of years, you know, and questioning whether, you know, the people who wrote those things thousands of years ago, whether they really witnessed what they wrote. You know what I mean? It became the same. In other words, I'm comparing the academic discussion about some things to be similar to the ecumenical discussion. But prior to...
I see your point.
You know, there wasn't... people understood. Sorry.
I'll give you my take, though. Let's go on the basis that there were no historical Jesus. Right? That we were theologically creating him. So we had to, we had query even down to even creating an image of this entity in iconoclasm. You see, they were creating him because the process started from Serapis, from Ptolemy I, the one Sota, which means savior. You see, they start theologically creating it. The first to speak to your comment, and Como. The first opposition against the Serapis, right, icon, came from the same Arius, right? And Arius is the one that say from the onset that he do not accept no human nature for the icon.
Yes, that's right, Bridget. Yeah, man.
The human nature was something that they were theologically implementing.
May I say this? Arius, from the Ethiopian perspective, Arius is not looked at highly. He's not looked at very highly. Neither is Nestorius. And it's interesting because the Ethiopians would withdraw from all that foolishness at a certain point in time. I'm just pointing out that I see the they as being others seeking to reinvent, like you're saying, invent like a Jesus or another Jesus idea that it seems others understood what they were believing. And the Ethiopians backing away from that, I believe, is demonstration. And Arius, when you mentioned Arius, I remember said, wait, man, the Ethiopians, you know, they basically dissed the shit out of Arius from their view. Their view is that Arius is like...
He's the heretic.
Yeah, Arius is dog. This clown. You know what I mean? I'm saying that this is the Ethiopian view, and then the Ethiopians would refrain from it. Because I think that what Ethiopians understood is that the ideas, the true ideas are African. But other people now want to debate and want to kind of bring in something more comfortable to their particular points of view. For example, like Arius. You know what I mean? So that means that either they created them all of a sudden, but the Ethiopian testimony testifies in others that this was already going on. In other words, people were already believing what they were believing. Now we're all called, imagine we all as Rastafari are called to a conference to decide the divinity of His Majesty.
So King, I said, you get your point out, and I think you get, I want to make sure you...
My brother, pray that.
Yeah. You see?
Well, yeah, we're going to get it. So I'm going to get it here. I'm going to get it, but I'm going to get it. So I'm going to feel get it out here.
They were theologically creating the icon. The process started with Serapis.
Yes, we get it.
The arguments and dispute actually started. The first person that put up an opposition was actually Arius. Now, I don't know how late down the line that Ethiopian position that was put forth there by Duras Iodanis came, right? But part of the opposition and resistance from Arius had to do with the fact that the invaders, who were the Greeks, actually got a small subset of the ecclesiastic community to go along with them in creating the icon Serapis. So their theological opposition and resistance to that, it wasn't just purely theology. You see, the Ethiopian position, it would seem like it's purely theological, but Arius was actually resisting the Greeks who came and conquered Egypt now, and now they find out that it is in the ecclesiastical society that hold all the knowledge about building pyramids and setting up the civilization. They wanted to get into that society. You see? And they threatened the priests and them to create an icon, a religious icon in Serapis. That they could use that icon to govern what now became the Greek Empire, which included in Egypt at that point.
Hold on, Bridgman. Excuse me, Bridgman, Rasai, sir, because I'm getting very confused here, because you're talking about the Ptolemy the First, right? So you're talking about the 3rd century BC. Yeah, he's in the 3rd century. So we've got 0 to 100, 100 to 200, 200 to 300, right? So with 3rd century BC, we've got 200 and I think he's about 290 something. The first Ptolemy, right? BC. You're talking about BC, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we get to Arius? Because Arius is in the 4th century AD. 5th century AD. Arius. 451. You know, them time they're up in the Council of Chalcedon, which is 451 AD. So we're talking about 800 years difference in the period from Ptolemy to him.
Yeah, but that's when they start having the discussions. Prior to that, there were no discussions. There were persecution going on.
Oh, what?
Against, you see, the ecclesiastical society in Egypt was a big group. They were going around and trying to get themselves inducted from Alexander into that society, that they can get close to the knowledge that these guys had, because it was these spiritual guys who intuit the knowledge of mathematics and all these things, why they could make pyramids and so forth.
Okay, Bridget, can I come in? Sorry. Can I just, well, sorry, do you need to continue or can I come in?
Okay, go. You're asking.
What I wanted to say, because I've got, you know, how I say, the item of heard me say, listen, this thing is coming out of Africa. It's no way coming into Africa from the north. It's coming out of Africa to the north, right? Well, I want to give you a scenario based on Ethiopian history and the Ethiopian king list. And the one called Shabaka. Is Shabaka in the Bible? I can't remember. Is the king Shabaka in the Bible, or is it Tahak? Is it Tahak?
Shishak.
Yeah,
Shishak, right? So Shabaka ain't in there, right?
No,
But in Ethiopian king list, if we're looking about now, because we're talking about the book of Isaiah, right? The book of Isaiah is supposed to be 8th century BC. Is it? Can you correct me with Matt? Is that right, Ras Adonis or Ras or Priest Isaac?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the connection. with the discussion.
Oh yeah, no, but I was just trying to get the dates, of the dating of Isaiah. I think is about 8th century BC.
Yeah, I think so, roughly.
I think, generally. Why I want to bring that in is because the Ethiopian eunuch was reading the book of Isaiah. And because I want to bring it out, I want to bring an Ethiopian route down into Christianity from the 8th century, the time of the book of Isaiah. And when we go into the Ethiopian king list, we go to King Shabaka II, Niga Shabaka II. He ruled from 750 to 740 BC. The Western people say they found his Shabaka stone. They have found the Shabaka stone. They date it to 715 BC. But the Ethiopian king list says it's 752 to 742 to 730. That's the reign of King Shabaka, so the second. Why I mention him? He's the man who commissioned the Shabaka stone, which is in the British Museum. But taking that away, he's now the father of the Kandake queens. After his reign, 730, when it finished, Kandake's reign, when Shabaka finished his reign, his daughter now came on the throne. The first Kandake queen, Kandake the First, 730 BC. And then the Kandake queens was ruling right the way through up until the fifth, Kandake the Fifth came to was 50 BC. I think she was from 50 to 32 BC, Kandake the Fifth. Well, 725. She wasn't from 750 to 725, from 50 to 25 BC. She was there upon the throne, the fifth. Don't forget the Ethiopian eunuch was with Kandake queen. He was the minister. So what I'm bringing you now is from 750 BC, which is the time of Isaiah, a people who the Ethiopian eunuch, who was practicing Hebrew, he was a practicing Hebrew because he'd gone to Jerusalem to give praises at Jerusalem because he was a practicing Hebrew, was the minister for the Kandake people. So if he was a minister for the Kandake people, the Kandake line, which comes from Shabaka, isn't that telling us that Hebrew, these people are already Hebrew? Because why is our man reading the book of Isaiah and he ain't a Hebrew, if that's written in Hebrew? Do you get my logic? The line has come through from 750 or 742 BC with Shabaka. His descendants, his prosperity ends up with the Kandake queens down into the time of Christ, where they speak, where he's the minister for the Kandake queen, and he's reading the book of Isaiah. So are they saying then do we have to presume now that the person who they've hired to be their minister is now a clever Jew instead of a black African? You know, are we making a distinction, or do you think he was one of a minister out of their land and out of their people? Because that's what I know. That's what it is. I can see the African root coming through there. I don't care what the Bible says. This is the Ethiopian king list, and this is the timing where it says in the Acts of the Apostles, without giving any date timelines, you know, because the Kandake queen, who they say now is Kandake VI, who is supposed to be the one who, Kandake VI is who the eunuch is supposed to have been working for. But I'm saying, what if it was Kandake V and she was there before Christ, BC, just before BC? Because there's a book called Did Jesus Live 100 Years BC, written by Mead, G.R.S. Mead. Did Christ live did he live 100 BC? That's 100 years before he could have been born. And they're saying he was born. This comes into Rastafari saying this mythological figure at around 0. But I'm saying, is he a real figure? Is he a living personality of an African? Because he was a priest also, because he would have been a priest of the Kandakes. The Kandake queens who were ruling the African throne had a priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood. And Jesus Christus, who they call Jesus Christus, Yeshua, is a living being who was crucified according to the books of G.R.S. Mead, but the timelines don't add up. So we have to try and make the timelines add up, right? So my man now, who came through into the Kandake time, Kandake V. Now, this Jesus Christus, or Yeshua, could have been a priest